composer thing, and Uh, Hi, everybody, and welcome to Save the CFPB episode 15. Oh, I'm so excited for today. With me today is a special guest, uh, Dr. Ryan McLaughlin.
Hi,
Ryan,
everybody.
there
Welcome
we are. Great to
to
hear you.
this.
Okay, so I just want to start the stream saying, oh, hey, like I got a new green background, and there it just completely failed. It's too dark, so I got to get a new one. I'm not any good at any of this. Um, Luckily, I did not have to pay for the poles that hold it up. I had a friend who already had the pole system, so we're good there. Um, so this stream is dedicated to my efforts to save the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That is a government agency for which I work. I have worked for 13 years. It was formed after the financial crisis in 2008, and its funding was cut by 50% in the big bill that we just had. Um, and so I'm out here today and well, a couple times a week asking folks to please call their representatives to ask them to support us in various ways. We'll get to that later on in the stream more detail, and I'll get into a little bit more of why you should care about the CFPB and what the CFPB has done for consumers in the United States. But what we have today with our special guest, I'm going to jump over to. Well, they can hear you on the screen. I don't have the image for, but if you saw the cover image for the video, you saw that this is a talk called "What Are Humans Anyways." This is actually kind of like a preview exclusive, isn't it, Ryan?
It is, yeah, because it's based on an upcoming talk I'm giving at Elms College coming up here
And
next
so
week.
everybody's getting a little bit of a sneak preview. It's a chance for you to practice on me.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, absolutely.
so this is about human dignity. I forget the subtitle on the poster I saw is a little bit different than what I put in the thing. Was
Yeah,
it the nature of
I think
human
so.
dignity?
It might. I think the human behind human dignity. I think that's what it is.
Yeah,
I think that's
that's
what
what
that.
it is. Yeah, that's what it is, which I'm very interested in. But also, Ryan has successfully completed Hollow Knight, a game which I am really bad at. And so while we talk about this serious topic, we are going to I'm going to fail at Hollow Knight, and Ryan is going to try his best apparently not to get distracted by how bad I am at Hollow Knight, and instead to talk about uh, humanity. And so am I. I'm going to try not to get distracted by how bad I am. I've started a new game, and I'm a new little bug man. I'm going to adjust the audio for Hollow Knight so it's not too distracting to folks. So let me chunk that down a little. I muted the music because the YouTube is often like, oh, you put music in it, and now it's marked. I don't know
Oh,
if that
copy.
affects. I
Yeah,
don't know if that affects how much people see it. So, but I don't
yeah.
want it to. So, all right. So let's start with the broad brush here. What is the talk about? What are you trying to grasp with this idea of humanity?
Well, I think there's for me, it's not about necessarily like answering the question, so to speak. Like, I don't know what the human really is. Um, but it's about exploring, I think, the pertinent questions and then playing around with how we might answer it. Like, are there better answers or worse answers?
Yeah.
And why might that be the case? And if we settle on an answer, what does that look like? Like, what are the ramifications of that answer? So that's kind of the direction I'm going. I certainly don't want to be like, I know what it is and I'm going to tell you, because I don't.
Hmm.
It's more just playing around with the concepts.
Yeah. I think you and I are both adherents to the Socratic tradition of asking
Hmm.
questions and never assuming that we know the answers, and just trying to
Yeah,
find
I mean,
better
yeah,
answers as we go.
yeah, right. Well, and also being able to ask the answers that other people give.
Yeah,
Where are the holes? Where are the contradictions? And that sort of is meant to, I think, lead to this state of aporia where you're like, I don't know, and that's okay, and then I have to live there for a little bit.
yeah.
Um,
And then, well,
yeah, so
there's
that's
different. I think. Well, not to get off track, but I think what's neat if you are a person who thinks about a lot of things for a long time, is you start
yeah,
to get an idea of the different levels of I don't know, and they
yes,
become
yeah,
some of them become very comfortable, some of them are very uncomfortable, but you start to draw different distinctions between what knowing
yeah,
is and what it is to not know. Yeah.
yeah.
So
Well, and I think you have to have enough. You have to have enough background information to like really be able to say I don't know in a meaningful way,
yeah,
right? Because if you just don't know anything, or like I shouldn't say don't know anything, but if you haven't looked into the question at all, of course you don't know. But that's different than saying I've looked into the question and what I found has convinced me that I don't know. And those
yeah,
are
that
two
I still don't
radically
have an
different
answer.
positions.
So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
know you have a lot of interest in animal welfare and the morality
Yeah.
around animal welfare. And so when we talk about
Mm-hmm.
the human in humanity and we talk about the human animal, and also, I mean, of course, you have background in theology as well. Um, do you have a thought on what distinguishes the human animal from, any other animal, apes, ants, whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I tend in the direction that the differences that exist are more degree than essence. So I think there's some things that we have that are radically different in terms of like the degree that we have. Um, Abstract thought, the way that we use language, things like that
Mm-hmm.
are very different. But I don't think there's a clean break anywhere. That's kind of where break from a lot of maybe a lot of the philosophical traditions. It seems to me
Mm-hmm.
that everything out of this evolutionary narrative and everything that we have is basically has a precursor somewhere else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Both good and bad things. I mean, that goes from our rationality to our probably tribalistic tendencies. Like
Mm-hmm.
all of that's built in the system, and we're just sort of recipients of that, refined further and further by trial and error through the process of evolution. So I kind of don't accept the idea that there's something, we are like a unique substance that has no predecessor
Yeah.
in the non-human world.
Right.
And that has a lot to, then that carries over a lot to what it means to be human and things that you believe about death and life and all that sort of stuff.
Yes, I agree. I mean, for me, this comes a lot in my contemplation of consciousness, and what it
Yes.
is that we call consciousness. And I mean, it has come up a lot in the past couple years, because AI has become such a, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a word without meaning. It's something that everybody uses like so colloquially, so easily, it rolls off their tongue, but so
Yeah.
meaninglessly, right? Anyways, point
Yes.
being that I don't think it's, when I'm talking about that, I don't think it's impossible to imagine artificial consciousness. But at the same time, I think that what we have in large language models and such is not the same thing. The networking and
No.
things, not to get into the fine detail, but is similar. But it's just the complexity isn't there because I mean, mostly because the brain is far more complex than any computer that we have. That's where it starts.
Yeah.
Anyways, but when I think of consciousness, I think that there are degrees of consciousness that we see in animals. When I think of self-awareness, I think there are degrees of self-awareness that we see in animals. Um,
Yeah.
and language maybe is very primitive, but I have an interesting point on that I'll get to in a second. And then I think morality. Interestingly, I do think there are animals who experience a form of morality that again is fairly limited compared to what we experience because of our really expanded capacity for thought.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and the thing I wanted to the interesting note, I find it really interesting how I mean the phenomena of dogs and how they have separated from wolves is really interesting in so many ways. But what I think is interesting is that we, through our gift of language, have kind of shared a little bit of the gift of language with dogs, and I think um,
Yes.
when it comes to language, human language, we are able to sometimes conceptualize things because we have words, and I think similarly we actually pass that on to canines a little by
Yeah,
giving
that's really
them
interesting.
ideas when we say words. Anyways, that's
Yeah,
a
because
whole
then
other topic,
well, it becomes
but
sort of
when
a
you're talking about degrees,
evolutionary mechanism.
yeah.
Yeah, so the degrees, the question with AI is interesting, I think, too, because the issue with consciousness is one definitional. Like what do we mean by that?
Hmm.
Um, there's not like a set definition on it right now. So
No,
you can
again,
have
a word that everybody uses
yeah,
without knowing what it means. Yeah.
right. So you can have a really low grade of consciousness, which just might mean sentience. You can have a higher grade of consciousness, which means um, self-awareness or reflection, and then you can have sort of reflection on your self-reflection and that kind of stuff, which can, depending on what you mean by the term, the circle of what creatures might qualify is going to shift, obviously. But the point I wanted to raise was, I think David Chalmers brought up he's sort of not infamous, but famous for the hard problem consciousness, and I think this is where, for a lot of people, the issue comes up of, you know, how does subjective experience arise out of something physical, and that is one of, I think, the more difficult questions, and that's why I don't think we have uh, a simple single vision of what
Mm.
consciousness is yet. So
Hmm.
what's
Hmm.
the
I.
relationship between me seeing something and experiencing it as me,
Hmm.
right? And let's say a identical clone of me experiencing something and experience it as them.
Yeah. I mean, what a fascinating thought experiment. So often, I mean, again, not to get sidetracked, but a twinned, a twinned version of you, and the which you is you, uh,
Yes.
is perplexing to people, and I think perplexing to me. I don't have the answer to it either, but just because it gets at something that we find so um, indivisible, immutable about ourselves, and then to
Yeah.
imagine that it can be muted, and the idea that we could map a brain, and then we maybe have you, maybe we have a double of you. I don't know if that's possible, but
Yeah.
it's something we think about getting closer to every day. And I
Yes.
think what's interesting about the physical universe, because physics, as you know, is a huge interest of mine too. Um, what I think
Yeah.
is interesting about the physical universe is how we imagine that there is a very objective universe behind the curtain, right? That we are experiencing consciousness, and that there is a very objective universe behind the curtain, and we're seeing it through a glass darkly. But I'm not convinced that's really exactly the case. At least I'm not. I think we have a really really twisted idea of how objective that reality is. I think that it's not just because there's uncertainty, or there's quantum stuff going on. It's just the idea.
Right.
It starts with just like that what you experience is some amount of time behind what is actually happening. Like it takes time for the light to hit your
Mm-hmm.
eye, and then your brain to process it, and then you think about it, and you move your arm, but that's not immediate, but it feels immediate. And
Yeah.
colors seem like colors, but there's nothing there. Objects seem like objects, but they're 99% empty space, and we only see them because light bounces
Yeah.
off their fields. And so
Yeah.
our idea of the objective, and I mean, then you get into things like, again, I'm getting sidetracked, but information theory and like if the universe is really
Right.
like the three-dimensional thing that we think we see, or if it's kind of a stored information blob that it really wouldn't look
Yeah.
anything like that
Yeah.
if
Yes.
we
Yes.
saw it in
Right.
a quote unquote
Right.
objective way.
Yeah. So, I mean, the objectivity thing is really, I think, important and interesting, and exactly for the reasons that you said. I mean, it's tempting to, I think, translate subjective experience as objective reality, or even like the access that we have to objective reality. And then I've asked, when I teach this, I ask my students, from an evolutionary standpoint, are brains like developed as truth finding machines, or are they developed as survival machines?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it seems clear that they develop as survival machines, because that's the sort of primary
Mm-hmm.
objective of, and there are times where truth actually gets in the way of survival.
Absolutely.
It's funny because you're playing this game, and we're watching it, and the game makes sense, but it only makes sense as a facade of, a projection of code.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you have this mechanism that translates whatever real reality is, if you want to call that, into something that makes it navigatable and survivable for you.
Mm-hmm.
And the temptation is to say, well, that's reality. But it seems clear to me that that's not the case. So you're stuck with basically filtering through the subjective experience of what maybe is objective reality, maybe isn't, but you're filtering through all of that and trying to make sense of it with the sort of, and if you can have the knowledge that, well, what I'm really doing is working through a screen of survival, so to speak, something,
Mm-hmm.
a facade that's put up so that I can survive better. And without that, like if I had you playing Hollow Knight and put you up against someone else playing Hollow Knight, and you see the screen, which is a facade
Mm-hmm.
of the code, and someone else just sees the code, like they're probably not going to do very well, because truth isn't always conducive to survival.
Right. Well, it's like this in the Matrix where it's like you start to look at the code and see the Matrix. It's like, well, maybe.
Yes, yes.
And
But
maybe
even if
we
that
are.
were the case,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
even if that were the case, like there's one scene in Matrix where the guy says, like, I don't even see code anymore. I just see like blonde, redhead, or whatever.
Right, right.
Even your brain is still trying to translate it into something navigatable.
Uh-huh. And I mean, that is essentially what, this is maybe a little bit of a cheap cheap point, but still, it is essentially what is happening all the time when we perceive things, is that there is just,
I think
it's
so.
matrix code, but we don't see that part. We're seeing light, and we're seeing it's being brought to us as the idea of solid objects and color.
Right.
We feel heat. I find it so fascinating. This is just something people don't talk about that often. Like, we feel heat in our nerves, but it is just light also. And it's just a different wavelength. And like to try to explain that to people, it's so foreign to our experience, because we only think about light being the oh god. I've made a huge mistake. Light being the things we see. And there you go.
Like what makes sight accessible. This
Right.
guy's gonna have some trouble with you. Oh.
Yeah.
There's-
That was a second death, I think. That was my second death. So we were talking earlier that a member of your family has beaten this with no deaths, and so
great.
My
son Grayson did it.
You can tell him that I've already failed to meet his standard. But
Get it out of the way. Get the failure out of the way.
There's an interesting whole other conversation I'd like to have with you sometime about a manga series that I'm a big fan of, and it's a very it's something I always tell people. It's a beautiful work of art that no one should read. Like, it's very, like, it has violence and cruelty in it that makes Game of Thrones, look tame. So it isn't the kind of thing I recommend to people to read, but I like to talk about certain concepts from it. One of those concepts, and I think it has to do with what you were talking about with truth, there's a mirror there. One of the concepts in it is kind of the idea that, I'm simplifying it, but that good is more of a struggle against status quo to a certain degree than it is that evil and good are on equal footing, right? Like evil is
Yeah.
almost what happens when you're not paying attention or when no one is struggling to make good happen. Similarly, I
Okay.
think that survival, like if our brains are built for survival versus truth, I think truth is what happens when you struggle against the default of survival. Also, apparently, I didn't
Yeah.
realize
Yeah.
this. We have a limited time in this meeting, so I'm going to have to re-invite you
Okay.
in like 10 minutes. But that's fine. I'll do a break and I'll send you a
That's
new
fine.
link.
Okay.
I
That
should
sounds
have I
good.
should have looked into
Okay.
that before, you know.
No, but I think that notion of and this makes me think a little bit of something Mahatma Gandhi said in a letter, I think to Himmler, I want to say that he said, I've considered the law of the jungle, which is sort of predicated upon survival, and decided that the
Mhm.
law of love is superior. And
Mhm.
so there's something in that sort of you can push away from the sort of simple survival instinct to something else, and perhaps that would be something like what sort of philosophy is traditionally called rationality, or existentialists
Mhm.
would call authenticity, or something like that.
Mhm.
I still think what's happening there is connected to survival, because you're thinking about how do I live in community, how do I live in
Mhm. I
society
think that
well. Uh,
it it
but I
is
do
like
like this idea that pushing back against survival.
it is like the reductionist argument of altruism, which I always hate because it's so um again, it's reductionist, I guess is why I don't like it, which is like, oh, there's no such thing as true altruism because altruism benefits you. If it makes you feel good, then it benefits you, or if it brings you higher station in your community, then it benefits you, blah blah blah, which I think is just
Yeah,
nonsensical.
yeah, yeah,
Okay, we can play that game all day long. Similarly, with
right.
saying rationality versus survival, you could play the game all day long that, oh, well, it still is survival because the rationality helps you in your community, et
Yes,
cetera, et cetera. But I think, and that's where we should draw that line. It's like, okay, we can have those arguments past that fence, and you can go over in that yard and argue them. But in this yard, we're going to start with doing
yeah,
something that basically is against your immediate interests, but helps somebody else is
yes,
altruistic. Or
yeah.
even, I don't
Well,
care, something that makes
and
you
the
feel
problem,
good but helps others, still altruistic.
yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, it's the reductionist altruistic response is, I mean, it's a false dilemma, because it suggests
Mm-hmm.
that you can only do something altruistically, gain no benefit from it.
Yep.
And I think there's a better question, which is, what is the primary reason for the primary intentionality behind the action? The primary intentionality, or the primary result, is someone else received more benefit, and your net benefit is somehow reduced, if we could even count it that way.
Mm-hmm.
It would still strike me as altruistic,
Yeah.
because the primary reason for your action, why you're doing what you're doing, isn't self-interest anymore.
I
And
think
I think
about,
that's enough for me to say
yeah,
altruistic.
I agree. And I think about like I often have this imaginary idea of this, the altruistic villain who's like, I'm going to, give candy to children and then they'll like me. And I'm like, go on with your bad self. Like,
Yeah,
who is
yeah,
going
yeah,
to,
yeah,
why is
yeah,
why is that
yeah,
something I'm going to fight against? Um, but yeah.
yeah.
So, anyways, sorry, we I want to make sure we stay on topic a little bit with your humanity
Yeah,
topic.
the human thing. Yeah. So it's one of the things that I find interesting about the question, and one of the first things I like to ask people is, like, if I'm dealing like in a classroom with something like this, is, if I just came to you and said, well, like, what are you? And you said, yes, well, I'm a human. Okay. And then Socratically went through the process of saying, so, like, what is the human? Like, how do we think the human? I found that in most cases, my students aren't really able to, like, get through the Socratic process. They always
Mm-hmm.
end in contradiction or aporia, or whatever. And one way I try to push that a little bit is to ask, I might ask a question like, you know, is from since I'm dealing a lot of time with like people from a faith tradition or
Mm-hmm.
Christianity, I say, is Jesus dead? And they'll say no. All right, Jesus isn't dead. Okay, that's great. Was Jesus ever dead? And they'll say yes. And then I'll say, well, what was Jesus doing when Jesus was dead? And they might say something like, well, he went into hell and preached to the captives in hell. That's sort of tradition of a Holy Saturday. And I say, but it's odd to say subjectively, like the pronoun Jesus is dead,
Mm-hmm.
and the pronoun Jesus is active somewhere. So what do we mean? What's the difference between being alive and being dead then? Um, and that's like a question that I think is really important because you have the subject, Jesus, acting
Mm-hmm.
similarly to when Jesus was alive, right? Apparently. And then but you have this idea that there's number three.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
that
I can tell
somehow
you the
there
difference
is
between
this.
death and being dead and being alive.
Yeah, you're walking around now without your shade.
Yeah.
This is interesting. But this happens similarly in funerals. If someone goes to a funeral and says, "Well, they're in a better place," and they use
Mm-hmm.
the pronoun they or she
Mm-hmm.
or he or whatever, and it's like, well, okay, if they are in a better place and they are dead, like, how do I make sense of this? What does this mean?
Yeah.
And it seems like death is really then for us, or at least just from that faith tradition, somehow like a transition from bodily existence to non-bodily existence. But or like what is essential to me, seems to remain somehow. And I find that really problematic
Mm-hmm.
because it sort of disregards, I think, the centrality of our experience as embodied creatures,
Mm-hmm.
and it reverts way back to Plato and thinking, well, we're really these immortal souls,
Yeah. And
or whatever we are, and everything else is accidental to us.
it's interesting here because I think that possibly I'm going to say this as kind of a clickbait, but possibly I am more spiritual than you on that front. And here's
Mm.
what I mean about that. Um, I hearken often to the Police song, "We Are Spirits in a Material World," and I think about that, and
Uh-huh.
I think about what people mean by spirit. And obviously, for me, I'm a naturalist. I believe very much in things being as they are and as we experience them as they are represented in the world. Physics or whatever we can discern through science,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah.
I see no spiritual matter or spiritual energy or anything like that that would constitute personhood or a soul after death. But as a
Mm-hmm.
physics adherent, I see a body of particles. Oh man, this guy hits hard. I, I see a body of particles moving through space, and somehow, and again, this part is where it gets more narrative almost, and I don't have a problem with that. Um, that it's somehow acknowledged as a person by other people around it, etc. And it's that body doesn't represent the same molecules and atoms and everything. It changes over time.
Right.
It
Right.
Ideas change, the chemical levels change, everything about you changes. But somehow there's a continuity
Yes.
that we ascribe to it narratively, and there's a continuity to it
Yes.
physically too. And what is most interesting to me about quote unquote the idea of a spirit or a soul in material reality is that it is a path through time and space that is immutable. We don't know of any way to alter time and we believe it's a dimension included and wrapped into what we call space-time, which means that a
Yeah.
person who has existed, always existed, will always exist, um, and can never be destroyed, right? So now you could say, okay, well, you're not really talking about the same thing, and I would totally agree. But it is interesting
Yeah.
for me because I categorically see that, and that is what I ascribe humanity and personhood to, is kind of a phenomena that's again very difficult to pin down, but we have like a common understanding of it. It's almost like emergent, right? We know it when we see it.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so I see that space time thing, and I'm like, well, the people I love, what they did never goes away in space time. It's always there, and I'll forget it one day, but it doesn't really matter because why is, and here's an interesting question I ask myself a lot too. Why is the world in 100 years more important than the world now? When I think of legacy
Mm.
or what we leave behind or what we owe people. Oh, and I've lost Ryan. So I'm I'm gonna go to my other screen while this guy cries in the background and do my 5 calls ask while I get Ryan back on the line. Um, Zoom is unfortunately very limiting to us today, but 5calls.org. I think it's on the screen now. Yeah, 5calls.org. So what am I asking? What we're asking is, and I'm asking on behalf of myself and my fellow union members and employees at the CFPB. I'm not representing the CFPB in this video. I'm not representing my union in this video. Just my thoughts from me. But I'm asking on behalf of, I think, the people who work for the CFPB all would agree with me. And I'm asking on behalf of American consumers. Please go to 5calls.org, search for CFPB, and you'll find some information there and a script. And you can use that information to call your representative and your 2 senators and ask them to make sure the CFPB gets its funding back in full. It would be great if that happened in this as a result of the shutdown. I mean, it's a perfect time for them to add an amendment to any bill that goes through that would fund the CFPB. There is also a Stop Scammers Act that they can sign on to, and that would restore funding to the CFPB. So, why the CFPB? Why should you spend your precious effort on this? There's so much other stuff going on. I agree. There is so much other stuff going on, and I wouldn't for a second say don't do all that other stuff too. I would say all of the above plus this. The CFPB has returned $21 billion to consumers since it was created. And it regulates personal loans, mortgages, car loans, student loans, bank accounts, you name it, as far as, consumer financial products go. And we take complaints. We've taken more complaints this year than we have in any previous year. It's a record year. I've been told we're taking about 4,000 complaints a day or more. So those all represent somebody having a problem with one of those products. If you go to consumerfinance.gov, you too can file a complaint if you're having a problem with a servicer of one of these kinds of debts. So that's the ask. And Ryan's back, so that's excellent. And hopefully he can hear me. Ryan, do you want to give me a hey ho or a ooh woo?
Hey,
There
hey,
we
I
go.
got you.
Okay, you're back.
Yeah.
So yeah, and there's also a script at nteu335.org/script that'll help you through the calling process. At this point, with the government shutdown and everything else, you're mostly going to be leaving voicemails. So if that makes you more comfortable, great. I mean, if you don't want to call, write a postcard, write a letter. They get all this stuff, and it helps out immensely when they hear from the people who they represent that that's what people want. And I hope that you would like to avoid another 2008 financial crisis, and that you'd like some, a cop on the beat, essentially, for these financial products, which people have so many problems with. And I think that, just my point is, it's very unfortunate. These products are so complex, even at the consumer level. Most people don't understand how mortgages work or variable rates and things like that. They're extremely complicated. The math is crazy. And I don't expect that people should have to learn all that stuff. I expect instead that there should be someone, the CFPB, who is out there to make sure that people are not using this complexity to take advantage of people who don't understand it. And that's all I'm really asking for. So please go to fivecalls.org, make those calls. It's not too late right now. If you're watching this later, it's not too late later. Anytime. If it's 2037, please still call them and tell them. I mean, either we're around or we're not. And either way, I think we should be. All right. We're going to move back to the crying guy in the gaming screen. So we were talking about humanity and I forget. I had to do all those fields.
You were going into the physics of it, which I thought was really interesting, and the idea of how time is work.
Yeah, that's where I see a continuity.
Way that you consider that as like an eternality of something, you know, like what you always exists and always retains. And I think that's legitimate. I do. Yeah, I think they're different things, but I think it's a good way of thinking about how we might begin to conceive of something like eternality, especially if you're like thinking like a block universe or something like that. The narrative thing that you said really resonates with me, because that's kind of my own view too, that there's a continuity over time of what we might call an unbroken narrative. And the example I use when I'm talking to students is like a river. You know, if I can look at a river, and I'm avoiding Heraclitus here for a moment, but I think Heraclitus is very much pertinent to the conversation, right? So if I'm looking at a river upstream and then I walk a mile downstream, I look at a river. What makes it the same river is not some enduring substance, but the unbroken continuity of it. And I think that, you know, the human narrative is similar in that sense. It's why I think the ship of Theseus is the same ship. Because it's, it has an...
As long as we're on all these old Greek things, someone did comment after I told them that we were going to be talking about humanity. They said to me, I thought it was a plucked chicken. So as long as we're making references to the ancient Greeks.
Yeah, that's the way that you can think of the cynical view of Plato's what is it? 2 legs with no feathers.
Yeah, 2 legs, no feathers. Yeah.
Right.
Behold the man is what Diogenes said. Yeah.
Behold the man.
Behold the man.
Oh my God. Yeah. So
he was a good time boy. Diogenes had. If for those out there who don't know Diogenes, go read the Wikipedia entry about him. It's got to be a fun time because he was a fun guy.
Yeah. The best plug I have for Diogenes is the narrative where, you know, he's approached by Alexander the Great, and Alexander says, "Is there?" You know, he's like sort of intrigued with Diogenes and says, "Is there anything I can do with you?" And Diogenes says, "Yeah, you can move to the left. You're blocking the sun." And Alexander's intrigued by this and says, "You know, if I weren't Alexander the Great, I would want to be Diogenes." And Diogenes responds, "If I weren't Diogenes, I'd also want to be Diogenes." Just it's like really, it's such an interesting character in the history of philosophy.
I feel the same way. If I wasn't Chuck, I'd want to be Chuck. So that's a success story in my book.
I wouldn't know how to be anybody else. That would be very confusing to me.
That too. I can't imagine it. Yeah.
Yeah. Now let me go back to the narrative thing, because I think that's important with regard to the issue of especially something like personal identity. I think that's what identity is, in a sense, this phenomenon of consciousness, which seems to have this, you know, connection in terms of like a narrative, unbroken narrative, continuity of narrative. And that's fine with me if I think that way. But I also think, and I sort of interested in your view, I guess, here, that when it comes to the question of the body, I mean, I'm much closer to Aristotle than I am to Plato on that sense, where you have this notion of the soul, as it were, being the form of the matter of the body. And so you have this kind of hylomorphism of this is you, and you are both body and soul, or matter and form, and neither can exist, as it were, without the other. And the reason I find that really important is because the reason I find that interesting is once we get past the notion that the body is accidental to the true substance of me, if that's a soul or spirit or mind or consciousness or whatever, if we get past that, then there's this really other interesting point of well, what is a human body,
Mm-hmm.
and what does it mean to be a human body? And this is where I
Mm-hmm.
think it starts to draw on more the lines of the non-human for me as well, because there's more non-human DNA in my body than there's human
Yes.
DNA. I mean, every mitochondria in my cells that have mitochondria is a non-human strand of
Yep.
DNA, based on that sort of uh, that what's the word I'm looking for now? My mind's drawing a
The
blank.
how
Um,
the mitochondrial DNA, like the mitochondria are their own organism that were essentially
yeah,
became parasites.
endosymbiosis. That's
Yeah,
endosymbiosis.
endosymbi. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't come up with the word endosymbiosis. So, but then you add the bacteria to that, and I think what becomes
Yep.
interesting to me is the sort of long history of philosophy of thinking the human in a maybe an Aristotelian sense of like separating the human from all of its relationships, because relation for Aristotle is an accidental category. And I think what you see in more modern and contemporary philosophy is that relation is actually, if we want to use substance or essential and accidental categories, it seems like relation is actually an essential part of what we are, right? And so you can't think the human without thinking the non-human simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I think that opens up an interesting route to think of human dignity as, if there is such a thing as human dignity, it seems like the non-human world is wrapped up in that. As
Yeah.
long as we don't relegate that simply to a soul. If it's the moment we include the body, we include the non-human world in that dignity with us.
Yeah. I mean, well, for lots of reasons, I think that your reasons are spot on, but I mean, you know, I enjoy the philosophical question. What do we owe each other? I enjoy that
Mm-hmm.
quite a bit, and I think a lot about it in terms of like what, why are, why are taxes fair, right? Why is
Mm-hmm.
taxation moral? And it's because I believe that we have a debt to living and dead people, and thus society becomes kind of the fiber that is woven from that. But then
Yeah.
it's easy enough to, I mean, I talk about dogs again. Said many times, like, what would humans be without dogs? They were so important to our survival.
Right.
And so there you start to say, okay, well, what do we owe dogs? What do we owe modern dogs? And I think that we all feel that because we look at dogs, most of us, and see the human qualities of them. And
Yeah.
indeed, that kind of humanity comes from evolving together. And cats,
Yeah.
too, and cows
Yes.
and sheep and everything else. I think when you talk to farmers who live off of, not, factory farm is a whole problematic thing, but if you talk to farmers who live off their animals, the respect that they have and the love that they
Yeah.
have
There's a
for
kinship.
animals, yeah, it's that for their animals is it's yeah, it's a true love. Like and again, extend their humanity extends to those animals. Now, does that give the animals exactly the same position as the people in their lives? No, but I think that if there are ways to act more morally towards animals that don't necessitate
Yeah.
treating them like humans.
Yes. Well, I think that should, so there's I think a few things happening simultaneously there. And one is the question of how we think ethics in the first place. That is, if we're thinking in terms of extensionist ethics, which would say, what is the line of moral considerability or direct moral concern, and what's included and what's excluded from that line? And then we start thinking in terms of, well, are animals conscious? Are they, whatever? But
Mm-hmm.
the other question, I mean, there's a whole nother field of this ethics, which is non-extensionist, which just says, like, again, it's difficult. You can't think the human without the dog, really. I mean,
Yeah.
because that's part of our narrative.
Mm-hmm.
You can't think the human without cyanobacteria. You can't
Yeah.
think the human without prokaryotes. You can't think the human without any of this. And that shifts to the question of the interrelatedness, the entanglement that we have with other creatures. Is like, you can't really separate the human from the non-human. And I agree with you. It doesn't mean that we have to think morally all obligations are the same across the board, right? And I think there's a capacities approach here that does make sense. Like, I think there's rationale for me to fight for, let's say, a certain animal's right to live, like a dog. It's like a dog has, I think, a right to life. Or I'm using rights language a little loosely here, but at
Sure.
least, to the extent that we need rights.
It's
But
fine.
I
Yeah,
wouldn't
yeah.
fight for a dog's right. I wouldn't fight for a dog's right to vote,
Yeah, yeah.
and that's because I think it's irrelevant to the capacities of a dog, right?
Right.
So the way that functions is the question of, well, what is flourishing? And again, I can go back to Aristotle here. What is flourishing for a particular creature, and you know how extensive is that duty or obligation to provide flourishing for other creatures?
I think that
And
dogs
that's
might
where I think.
vote better than some people, but that's a different
Well,
different thing.
that octopus that could kept predicting like who would win those
Yeah,
games, like, just
I
that should
might
be
go
up
for the
from now
octopus.
on.
Yeah. Hey, they're very smart. But I think that it goes
They are.
further. You can't imagine the human without the dog. You can't imagine the human without cyanobacteria. You can't imagine the human without all of Earth's creation. Not
Right,
capital C,
absolutely.
but you can't
Yeah.
imagine it without dinosaurs. You can't imagine it doesn't. Any
Or even,
change, we cannot understand
yeah, I
what
mean, yeah, I did a video series for it was a class I taught called Living as Nature, and we started with, I'm going to speak loosely here because I know I'm talking to someone who likes physics, but
Yeah.
the four fundamental forces, and I'm using
Hmm.
forces under quotation marks there, okay?
No, that I
You know,
mean, we're still that's it. So everything's a model. So you can get
yeah,
away with
yeah,
everything, Dave. This is my model for
yeah, that's good. That's as long as that caveat's out there.
yeah,
But the role that electromagnetism plays. I mean, it's like it's perpetual. It's
yeah.
that's chemistry, right? That's valence electrons working in certain ways. Gravity seems more obvious, but weak and strong nuclear forces as well, and life and death of stars, which creates heavy elements. Like all of that is our story. It's part of the narrative that I think that we're a part of. And if there is such a thing as a meta narrative, I think that's it. You
Sorry,
know,
I just clearly don't understand this game. I do not know what's to do with the guy with the big club at all. Anyways,
that
yeah, I think that and that's
all of
what's
that is to get a
interesting.
grub. You're just trying to save a grub there.
All that is interesting because the narrative model can be recycled and reused in so many ways. The narrative of the Earth, the
Right.
narrative
Yeah.
of the physics that we experience in this universe, which we don't necessarily, know are the physics of every universe. I mean, we have kind of this problem
Yeah.
where you can only see the universe you're in, and that's kind of the definition of universe. It's like weird to me because when I hear physicists, yeah, I love listening to like pop physics stuff, and when they talk about other universes and like, oh, well, maybe we could see another universe by blah blah blah. I'm always like, how do you know it's another universe?
Yeah.
Aren't you still in our
Yeah.
universe
Like,
if you can see
what would
it?
be the yeah.
It's a
Yeah,
very,
like someone who just
ontological
opens the
thing.
door in a
So,
house and they're still in that house, but they think
yeah.
they've gone somewhere else. Yeah,
But the narrative thing is I think is key. And here's I wanted to go back to the body thing, because I experienced I mean it's been like a decade, but someone in my life going deep into dementia over
okay,
the course of it was like the course of 2 months maybe.
okay,
And what was interesting about that is, I mean, I think a lot of people go through this in a very painful way that lasts a very long time, and I think that it was better that it was a
yeah,
comparatively short amount of time, and it made it easier
yes,
because you saw the person slip away faster. The humanity, not qua the how we should take care of this person, how we should treat them, but rather the humanity, i.e., the person themselves. Like, um, the you just see it slip away, and the body is still
yeah,
there, and the voice is still there, the eyes, everything else is still present, but there's something that
hmm,
is going, and then it is gone.
yeah,
And then I mean, anybody who's been at a funeral has seen a a body with no person in it.
right,
But
right, yeah,
yet we can also, I mean, I think it's maybe a little bit soap opera, um, soap opera story to say like Amnesia, but at the same time, recently I saw the film Warfare, which is really interesting for a lot of reasons, but that don't have anything to do with their topic here. But it involves a real story of combat in Iraq during the Iraq War. And to create the story, the person who was kind of producing it, who was one of the soldiers, went and asked everybody for their recollection. But several of the people involved don't remember any of it. And that in and of itself is a very interesting thing. I mean, I forget things and people tell me like, no, you said blah. And I'm like, maybe. I don't know. That doesn't sound like me, but I guess I could have. But in more serious trauma, we see it where, memory is gone. And so the person who was there, was it a part of that narrative? It's a part of other people's narratives.
Yeah, and I think this is where narrative actually has a better, to my mind, has a better sort of approach. Let's say someone like like Locke's notion of the sort of human as memory, right? That's the identity of memory, and there obviously, and the problems that you're mentioning here are the problems with Locke. I think his position that well, one, people forget, or what we know now about trauma, and two, I don't think we ever remember perfectly. From a psychological.
Yeah, that has been shown. I mean, there are a lot of modern studies that show that each recollection of memory alters it because the chemicals change the nature of it.
Yes, and so you're always remembering the last time you remembered something, and that's like what happens. And it's like a telephone game with yourself, essentially. Memory is. Now, the reason I think narrative is kind of better than this is because I think it makes sense to say, if I had a traumatic experience and I forgot it, or if I just forgot something, the very fact that it may be the trauma that causes like the forgetfulness, then I think from a narrative perspective, you can still include it then. Yeah. Because that shapes us, not just like in terms of like some immaterial soul, it physiologically shapes us, right? Those experiences. And so they did happen. They dictate, not, I want to say dictate, but who we are, even if whether we remember them or not. And so lack of memory can be a part of that. And I think narrative can accommodate that, whereas like Locke's memory theory can't.
And I think that this is where it gets, part into my personal view of that narrative identity, is that, I think in a very real way, now that film has become a part of the narrative identity of the people involved in the incident. Because
that's interesting.
In this specific case, that film itself was, rooted in, and I'm not saying most films do this, but it was rooted in their collective platoon trying to recreate it, in essence, for the people who could not remember it. And
that's really interesting.
It's such an interesting, but when I'm gone physically, or brain signally, and people continue to tell quote unquote my story, I think that is still a part of what I consider my narrative identity, my spirit, right? And that is why while my brain still works, I want to try to create an identity that when the brain doesn't work anymore, the narrative that is being spun afterwards is as close to the narrative I want as possible. And that goes back to moral behavior and what I think, why do things right, or it's complex. I think there's more than one answer, not just because things are good, but because, well, if you think that you want to be valued by your community in a certain way, maybe that guides you as well in your moral choices. I think that narrative goes beyond death. It may even go before me. I'd have to think about what the implications of that are. But my parents,
I think it definitely goes before you. Yeah, absolutely. this is one reason why sometimes I'll talk to my students about the importance of narrative, because I think when we tell our story, when we say, I think of grandparents telling stories to grandchildren about, times when they did this or this was happening,
Yes.
and I say, well, how many of you are ever sort of annoyed or bored when this is happening? And a lot of them will say, yeah, it's kind of, and I say, but it's interesting because if we are narrative, like, what are they actually sharing with you?
Yeah.
I mean, it's nothing short of sharing themselves. Like that's who
And
and what they are in a way. And it's like,
what's
and I think I just imagine, and I push a little further to say, how many of you know like the names of your great grandparents or what they did or the kind of
hmm
story that they lived or their
Yeah.
like. And there's a depressing thought of like, the data shows that 3 generations from now, there will be people who are only alive because of my narrative,
hmm
and they won't know anything about me.
Yeah.
And there's a depressing part of that, but I still think even whether they remember it or not, I mean, I'm part of that story.
Oh yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I
They
make that story.
can't get
So
rid of you.
this is, yeah, right. So that narrative still exists. It predates us, but I do think there's a special period in the narrative where you do have this subjective conscious
hmm
experience. And this is, I think, what fascinates people the most and what terrifies people the most. The idea that, what is life without, like, if I die and that's the end of quote unquote me, and by me they mean subjective conscious experience.
hmm
Like I can't even. It's like something that they can't even fathom.
hmm
And I sort of resonate with that too, because it's a I mean Heidegger, knew this a while ago. It's like
Yeah.
that's a scary thought, right? I mean, and that anxiety drives us in a way.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Yeah, but I also think then there's something to be said for like what you're saying, that what I have now is a sort of, it appears to be some conscious level of contributing to the narrative of which I'm a part. And I think
hmm
of Whitman here, the powerful play goes on and you can contribute a verse. That's a bit trite, but you get the idea.
No, yeah. Trite
And
sometimes
so
works.
the question is, yeah. The question then is like, well, if this is what I am, a small conscious blip in a much larger narrative that goes back to not just my grandparents, but it's sort of like the plank time, the
Yeah.
plank time of the universe. But what do I do with that? Like, how do I sort of function in that space? And if I can think of myself that way, it's terrifying. But I think it's also, there's a certain beautiful sort of quality about that as well. You know,
I 2 points I want
so
first.
that's the way of thinking.
Yeah. No, I feel you 100%. And one thing I just wanted to say is it's something I know in my bones, and it is interesting to me, is how much the Great Depression has shaped me. I did not live through the Great
Mm.
Depression, but
Right,
my
right.
grandfather growing up on a farm in the Depression era, rural Pennsylvania, shaped me in so many ways that I appreciate deeply. But it's an event that is 50 years removed from my birth, um,
Yeah,
but
right.
is core to me in so many ways. And then
Yeah,
I wanted to also just make a case for the narrative spirit, or the narrative self, being as
yeah,
real as anything else, because there's thermodynamics and physics. It's very difficult to reconstruct the universe. You'd have to know where everything is and everything was, but theoretically, if you had enough information, you could do it. There is
okay,
the
yeah,
theory is there's nothing going on under there that can't be expressed as information that could then be reconstructed, right? And then if you have that information and you know all the rules, you can just reconstruct the events, right? And currently, that's
yeah,
still, I mean, basically how we see the universe. And it's not about determinism, free will. It's just a, purely information, and how it is
yeah,
expressed
yeah,
in physics. Um, so I think by the same token, and the narrative self is extremely real, because while it may be based on subjective statements by people or how they saw you, those are there's no reason to say that's invalid. They may have made
Right.
mistakes, but that they're mistakes about how they saw you, which again, I mean, unfortunately, are strongly influenced by their own experiences and their own narrative. Um, you know, how people feel about you so often has so little to do with you. um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I think it's incredibly valid. I think it's entirely valid. So I think that people could cheapen it by saying, "Well, what is that even? That's not. It doesn't feel firm." But yeah,
Yes.
again, when you look at physical reality, there's not that much firmness. And as for the terror of existential angst and the shit, I mean, I love consciousness. It's super cool to be a being that is choosing as much as whatever and thinking. I love it. I love the thinking part. Really, it's great.
Yeah.
Um, and the feeling part is cool sometimes. Um, I do like the idea of continuing on, but in a different way. I don't know, the whole narrative thing has given me a great deal of peace about the
Yeah.
end of it. And that is like every day I can live up to that narrative. That's what I really like about how it makes me feel is every day I am questing, or trying to be that narrative, which brings me back to something Socrates said, which is like the surest and shortest way to be, I forget what you want to be in life is to essentially to pretend to be it, and then you'll find that by practicing you will be what you pretend to
Yeah.
be.
Yeah.
In much the same way, like by trying to live up to that narrative self that I idealize, I create a better life for myself, and it guides itself towards that story that I want to be my story.
Yes. And that leaves a nice place for like subjectivity, some level of what we might call responsibility. Again, we're toying with the idea of like, well, who knows, somewhere between determinism and
Mm-hmm.
libertarianism, libertarian free will, what is actually real, like what makes sense
Yeah,
there. But leaving that
I
question aside for a minute, there's
I think
something
it's a
there
false
going on where,
dichotomy, but we could, that's a different discussion.
yeah, well, that would be a fun discussion because I think I find compatibilism so unsatisfying.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah, I could
my own view
understand
on
that
it.
entirely. I could understand that entirely. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
if you really, not to give spoilers, but if you really, really got down to it, I would just say it's deterministic. Just shut up about it. But
right, yeah, yeah,
the idea that people want to promote as far as free will goes, I'm like, that's fine. You can have that. Like, you can have that, but why? What does it do? It doesn't do anything. That's my main point.
yeah. So I mean,
But
and I guess
that's a
the
side
question would
topic.
be, I think there was an interesting study with I wish I could remember the details of it, but it was a group that was like some of them were giving like information about like free will existing, and some of them were giving information about like determinism, like different arguments based on like
Mm-hmm.
what made the most sense, like and then they were put into this situation where they could, I think, lie or cheat or something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
it did it. I really want to remember this. I can't remember, but anyway, the people who were influenced by the deterministic thinking like were more prone than
Oh.
to lie and cheat because they didn't feel any sort of sense of personal responsibility for it. And I think there's an
Uh-huh.
existential, even if it's wrong, there might be an existential value to believing in free will,
Oh yeah. Well,
even if
here's what
it's wrong.
I talked about this on my old podcast once, and I came up with these characters, and I was Plinko and Planko, and they were robots, and
Okay.
um, Plinko was programmed to be nice, and Planko was programmed to hit you with a board, which is why it was called Planko. And it is more really about punishment, and that's like, it doesn't matter that they're programmed, you still need to reform Planko. And I guess to
Yes.
turn the
Yeah.
mirror on that, it's like it doesn't matter if it's deterministic. Doing the right things is still like there are still moral justifications for it. But I think
Yeah.
that I mean, so I agree that there may be a perfectly good reason to try and philosophize, or create religious or social beliefs that rely on free will, because I think it's a more constructive concept. But I think both of them are
Yeah.
concepts, and it doesn't really go any further than that. But I
Yeah,
also think
yeah.
that basically people will subconsciously, the brain is so lazy that people will, the brain will use any excuse to do immoral things if they are also lazy, right? Most people aren't supervillains because that's a lot of work. But most people will like take an extra donut or whatever at work if they think they can get away with it, right? Because that's an easy one.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, and that comes down to, I mean, I don't want to say morality is so much based on how lazy you are at the moment, but it's absolutely true that if you're stressed out, you are going to behave more immorally. I don't know if there are studies on that, but I know a lot of studies about how people behave when they're stressed, and I would have to think that that is the case. I mean,
Yeah,
by
that'd
the
be really
judgment
interesting.
of like, by the judgment of simple, like, well, are you going to take something that doesn't belong to you? Are you going to,
Yeah,
take the
right.
extra donut?
Not murder someone, maybe, but
Right.
something yeah.
But
No,
one such study is, for instance, like just on how much that kind of thing can affect our decision making. Is like they gave people hard math problems. I won't get this exactly right, but they gave people hard math problems and then basically offered them chocolate cake or a healthy option. And the people who didn't have the hard math problems, or the people whose math problems were easier or whatever, took the healthy option. And the people who's had to, hold some horrible number in their head or something like that, because I think they had to
Yeah.
hold the number in their head and walk down a hallway. And the people who had to do the
Okay.
stressful activity took the chocolate cake.
Comfort. You need that comfort food after that
Yeah,
activity. You got to
yeah,
have
yeah.
it. Yeah. Well, this also raises, I think, to me, and this is something that's, I mean, Aristotle, I think, was aware of, but you can find, I think, it more recently in like the work of like John Rawls, and it's
Mm-hmm.
a thing that I think we don't adequately tend to account for philosophically or otherwise, and I think that's the role of like the role of luck in who we
Yep.
are, what we are, and our
Uh
own
huh.
moral sort of framework, what we think is right or wrong. And I think the role of luck is way more substantial than most people give it
Yes.
credit for. That's partly because I think we live in a society that wants to value meritocracy.
Mm-hmm.
That wants to think that like you earn what you do, you earn the good you do, and you're responsible for the bad that you do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that's the one reason why, when you asked earlier, like, what do we owe each other? Why is it good to pay taxes?
Mm-hmm.
It's partly because I think the sort of concept of meritocracy is sort of
Mm-hmm.
philosophically broken, because it doesn't give an adequate account of luck. And I think this was Rawls. One of his main points was, like,
Mm-hmm.
you can in society try to correct for the bad luck of others. And Aristotle thought the same thing with like the state's primary role being education, right? That's what we do. We sort of try to correct for, as it were, quote unquote, bad upbringing or something like that. But I think you have to get to that point where you really can appreciate how substantial a role luck plays in your
Mm-hmm.
own moral development and in your own quote unquote success or in your own failure.
Yes.
And I think that's a big piece that's often missing from anthropologies, philosophical
Mm-hmm.
anthropologies, or theological
I
anthropologies.
I think you're 100% correct, and that's why one of my major kind of moral teachings for my kids is, I call it grace, humility. You could
Yeah,
call it
yeah,
luck. I mean, the word luck has its own, whatever. But for me, it's, the grace and humility, which is to say, okay, well, we have this, you have your health, you have whatever. Be gracious about that. Be thankful, not to,
yeah,
we don't, I mean, I let my kids choose whatever. I mean, obviously they were influenced by me. I was like, I told them their whole life, if you ever, whatever religion you want to adopt, if you become interested, I'll
yeah,
help you
yeah,
out.
sure,
Just let me know.
yeah,
They ended up just being like, nah, nothing, thanks. But
yeah.
um, the,
I'm good.
yeah, but I mean, I don't need a religion to tell them all about what their moral obligations are. So works out.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
the just being thankful to randomness, right? I mean, if you can be thankful to God, and you have no idea why he's doing the things he's doing, then you can certainly be thankful to randomness that
yeah. Well,
you
yeah.
just
It's
ended
funny.
up here.
there's a lot of I hear Christians often say, there but for the grace of God go I.
Yeah.
And but then they follow that up with like this, like oftentimes, this sort of like harsh judgment.
Yeah.
Like what doesn't it doesn't seem to follow there
No.
if there but for the grace of God goes like, were you lucky to receive this grace and were they unlucky not to receive it? But I actually more recently heard a cooler expression, and it was there but for the grace of odds go I. Uh,
I
and
like
I
that
thought
one.
that was really fascinating because
Yeah.
it's a similar concept, but it's really the recognition of,
Yeah.
man, it's just you win or lose a natural lottery and the social lottery, oftentimes
Mm-hmm.
based on luck, because when, where you're born, what you're born with, who
Yep.
you're born to. I mean, it's that
And it's
those are
a
fundamental. And I
day-to-day
think your
lottery.
point of like sort of yes, well, right, and that notion of graciousness,
Mm-hmm.
both in sort of like having a sense of maybe thankfulness or whatever you want to say for like my own situation, but also then having a sense of not pity, that's not the right word, but having just the recognition of
Yes.
like, man, we're all sort of kind of contending with this
It,
massive reality that we don't choose, and I think
yeah.
Heidegger, again, we're thrown into the world,
Mm.
and that's it, and then you have to like
Yeah.
sort of live with that.
Uh,
And if there is free will, which I don't know that there is, I mean, and
yeah.
I kind of, but if there is, it has to be highly restricted in my mind by luck.
Yeah.
Like it's like a small sliver of like possibility within
It's
the realm of like infinite possibilities.
it's hard to even conceptualize. Like that's why I'm really like it's just determinism, but just shut up about it because it's hard for me to even
Yeah.
conceptualize what free will would be and where it would exist and how it would exercise itself. And that's why I'm okay with
Yes.
compatibilism because I'm like, well, what do you mean when you say free will? And it's like, well, I'm making my own choices. All right, well, how would you know that you weren't in a world with free will? Like, and
Yeah.
even if
Yeah.
there was
Well,
an
that's
ultimate observer, even if God was like, let's say that there is a God who exists and he's like, he knows um, everything that's going to happen, but he still can't tell me if that's a
yeah.
result of free will or not. He could just tell me it's
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
happen.
Right. Yeah. So that and this is a debate that does foreknowledge negate free will, and some people say
Yeah,
yes, some people say no. I do think there's a case to be said for no, but it also raises, Aristotle thought this a while before, like
yeah,
if every truth apt premise has a truth value, what do I do with a truth apt premise? It will rain tomorrow, because
yeah.
apparently it's either true or false now, and if it is true, then it seems like it has to rain tomorrow. But that's a sort of separate conversation a little bit.
No,
Yeah, but
I love that because it also gets into like temporal physics and when people
yeah,
talk about time travel and again a thing
yes.
I find so kind of ridiculous on its face. I mean, I'm not a
Right, right.
I'm not a top physicist, but it's just like we haven't ever met a time traveler, so don't you think there's a little bit of a problem with time travel? I've lost Ryan again. That's okay. I'm gonna see if he wants to do another half hour with me. Hopefully, I hope you're all enjoying it. I'm loving it. I'm gonna just ask him real quick. But in the meantime, what I'm gonna do is switch our screen to our other ask for this evening, and that is our change.org petition at change.org/stop vote. This one has to do with our the acting director of the CFB, who also is the OMB director, who also is one of the creators of the Project 2025 documents. And let's see, does he do anything else? I don't know. But he's out there right now talking about, firing federal employees who are currently furloughed or doing layoffs and things like that. But more to the point, hold on one second. I'm having a different problem, and I needed to interrupt my ask real fast. to coordinate something with Ryan, who so I apologize for this little pause. Sorry, Zoom has informed me I can't create another meeting for 9 minutes, which might now be 8 minutes. That's still too long. I don't want to wait that. You don't want to hear me talk for 8 minutes about this petition. But so we are trying to create a petition because we think that the acting director of the CFB is not acting in the best interest of American consumers or taxpayers. So, you know. The other note I want to talk about of the CFPB real fast and about our funding cut, and I'm going to bring up 5 calls to talk about that. And that is the CFPB funding is not from the budget. It is not taxpayer money. It is from the Federal Reserve. So cutting the CFPB's budget by 50% in the big bill did not save the taxpayers any money. And that sucks, right? We're returning billions of dollars to taxpayers, to consumers, not costing them any money. We return money at a rate of almost, I think, $3 for every $1 we spend, and you cut it? Why? Well, it turns out nobody really answered that question. At least I didn't see anybody saying why. They'll talk about it being the CFPB being a political blah blah blah. I mean, the people at the CFB are hired the same way every government employee is hired. There's no nepotism. There's no hiring your friends. It's a double-blind process, essentially. So everybody's hired on merit. So I don't get that. It's political what? How? How is it? So, you know, I think that's another reason to fight for the CFB's funding to come back. All right, I'm getting into another meeting with Ryan. I want to make sure that we're going to have sound and everything because we have a lot of interesting things to talk about still.
Funding.
Hello there. Okay, let me make sure that
I'm getting into another meeting with Ryan. I want to make sure that we're going to have sound and everything.
Oh,
we have a lot of interesting things
my
to talk about.
sound on your end. Oh, you know what? You can't hear me because my audio is muted. Now you can hear me, hopefully.
Yeah, I got you.
Okay, yeah. We got Zoom audio coming through. Great. Thank you so much. Okay. Sorry about all that. So, yeah, just to finish my thought about the CFPB not taking taxpayer money, but returning money to taxpayers. What better deal could you get? How much more efficient could you get than that? So, please call your senators, call your representative, and ask them to restore CFPB's funding. Now, back to the game and the Ryan. But yeah, I forget what we were talking about because again, as soon as I talk about something else, my brain, free will. We'll solve that one real quick.
Well, I did want to add to the conversation because I think you had raised the question: how would you know you were making a free decision? Mm-hmm. I think another really damning issue that libertarian free will faces is, I mean, you essentially, if you want that kind of free will, you're stuck with like actions without cause, right? Because like if something is a sufficient cause for your decision, then it's determined. And if there is no sufficient cause, the question is, well, how does it come about in the first place?
Yeah, it's almost like
what brings it about.
It's almost like your choices are determinism or randomness. I mean, I know right. I'm
and
not strictly arguing that, but there's a way of looking at it where you're kind of like, well, yeah, if it's not determined by events beforehand, what is it?
Yeah. And if it's internally determined, which is what we would call compatibilism, whatever you are is also determined by external things as well. Exactly. So you're back to determinism. So like it's all determinism, and I think determinism to me makes more sense logically than libertarian free will. Sure.
Yeah, I think that's essentially what my argument is that it's like it's almost reductio ad absurdum, but at the end of the reductio, you always get to determinism. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah, right.
it always seems like that's the one thing that's left for you, in front of you. I mean, an interesting thing is like some people will talk about like, well, there's like a quantum uncertainty, because essentially, particles can exist in a state where you don't know what they are.
Yeah,
I'm not going to
yeah,
explain. I mean, this, but I'm just saying for people listening. There's
yeah.
this like probabilistic thing where it's like, well, if we hit it with light so that we can see what it is, because it's the only way to see what it is, there's like a 30% chance that it's going to be this, and like a 70% chance that it's going to be this. And this is the basis of quantum computing. If we ever actually figure that out, I'm not convinced. But
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
that randomness, if you're like, well, then maybe free will is there, is even, I think, worse than
Yeah,
other
yeah,
conceptualizations of free will, because
yeah.
again, now you're back to dice, and it just
Yes.
doesn't sound as good. Anyways.
Right. No, and I think you could add to that one, it's unclear what kind of causal relationship there is between quantum phenomenon and
Mm-hmm.
non-quantum phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I think you're better off if you want to play that game going with something like chaos theory.
Yeah.
But again, you're still stuck then with I'm not making decisions. It's just
Mm-hmm.
that my decisions are either intrinsically or unpredictable, or are
Mm-hmm.
unpredictable because no one can account for all the
Yeah,
variables that are at play.
because the variable, because it's a three-body problem. Yeah, because
Yeah,
essentially,
right, yeah.
it's too complex to you can predict for a little bit and then it gets completely out of hand. Um,
Yes, yeah,
yeah, and I mean there you see patterns and stuff. I mean, chaos theory gets a lot into how you can discern patterns from basically signal from what appears to be noise in long-term sets and things like that. So again, you get back to
mm-hmm.
okay, well, there's some predictability, but it's not really fine level, and you can get some free will out of that maybe. But again, I don't know what it's worth. I don't know what it's worth. I don't know what it gets you that you don't have already.
No, when I don't even think you can get free will out of that. I think you can just get indeterminism out of that.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's indeterminism, if you aren't determining something, like whatever that means, I mean,
Yeah.
it's not like it's not like you're making choices. It's just that whatever occurs is indeterminate. But it's not that you as an agent are making choices. Then those are two separate things.
Yeah, I think that
you're still stuck with something
mm-hmm.
wrong.
I think that free will advocates often kind of the same kind of God of the gaps argument, where it's like the slivers that you can find where it's indeterminate,
Yeah.
then get by people who are arguing for free will argue that as a point in favor.
You weren't in there. Yeah,
and it's just like, no, that's not really how that works. But anyways, let's get back to humanity, because one thing, and dignity, that was one thing I wanted to talk about because I think it's very pertinent to modern issues that we have in our culture right now, and in a lot of cultures across the world, and they're not new issues. It's just that they're focused on that. We talk. I'm sorry, I just ran into spikes like an idiot. Sorry. Anyways, when we talk about dignity, and we talk about feeling one's humanity, we talked about narrative identity, and I think that identity is core to everything. I have a 3.5-hour live stream on this channel. If you are someone interested in learning about my opinions about identity, go watch it. I do a 3-hour. There's breaks for me asking you to save the CFPB, but I do a 3-hour talk with PowerPoint slides about identity while playing Elden Ring. So, and probably doing both poorly. So, a friend of mine said he watched a little bit of it and he's like, it's the experience of being your friend. So there you go, everybody. You can enjoy that. I want to talk about identity, is specifically about gender, because
okay, this is interesting.
and it's not because it's the only thing here. I think a lot of people talk about when you talk about identity, humanity, and the body, I think gender's just the easiest thing to talk about. But
Sure.
I think that, and that's because there's a social construct to it. There's an innate part to it for sure. Like we have the studies that show it's not completely a social construct, probably. So it's very complicated, but it's something people talk about almost every day now. So I think it's an easy topic to go into. But I don't think it's the only topic when it comes to the dissociation of body and identity, and narrative identity, narrative soul, spirit, whatever. I find that topic really interesting, and I was wondering how you approach it in this thing.
That's a complex question, and it's a big question. I think before I say anything about the immediate question, I think there's also an epistemological thing going on here for me. And that is, I think this with the question of gender identity a lot, that, if we make the claim, biology tells us X, right? And this is a fact. I hear this a lot from people, like, it's a fact that there are, let's say, two genders, something like that. I think it makes sense to distinguish between, on the one hand, a biological reality. Let's say that, most chromosomes are going to be XX or XY, even though that's not the only two options. There's a difference between saying that is true, and then our categorization of that as, it's so bad. Our categorization of that, yes, our categorization of that as, reality is then, X is this and XY is that, male and female, female and male. You would then say, okay, well, there's a distinction between the categorization and the whatever you want to call biological fact. So if I could, an example of this would be like let's say planets. Like, the definition of a planet is now built on empirical observations, right? It has certain qualities about it. But that doesn't mean that some things are planets and some things aren't planets intrinsically. It means that we have a set of criteria that goes one into one category and one into other. So Pluto falls out of, planethood or whatever. But it's all that is us classifying according to a particular way of thinking. So I think there's a big difference between saying, there's XX and XY, and then there's only male and female. And the reason I say that is because one is XXXY, I think is a demonstrable empirical claim. And one is more social, a categorical or a categorizing of that claim.
Yes.
And that leads me to sort of a little bit of I don't want to jump in and say, I don't see many people arguing that, no, I don't have XX chromosomes. That's not like sort of what transgender means, really. So far as I understand it. Only that
not my experience, no.
Right. Or the categorization of this reality, or the way that the social aspect comes into it. Like, this is where there's a break, right? And so that's an epistemological thing, the distinction between a scientific fact and how we categorize scientific data. And I think those are two radically different things. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I have no point to make there. I want to hear the rest of what you're saying.
So then the issue then comes, like, that's almost to not talk my way out of that, but it may also be a moot point because, if I talk to someone who is transgender, their claim is not that they have necessarily a different chromosomal structure. It's that's not really how it functions, right? Even though that can happen, and then you can have different sexual expressions or gender expressions. But more often than not, it's a subjective. It's how I understand it. A subjective, like, internal. I understand this is quote unquote the body that I am, and yet I don't resonate with how it's categorized that I should feel or identify as this body. And so the scientific facts remain. No one's arguing that I can see, like, oh, everyone who is transgender must have sort of some chromosomal abnormality, for lack of a better word. In other words, I just mean it's different than what's standard or what's typical. Um, it's something different than that that's happening. So then the question becomes, well, how does that work with the notion of embodiment? I think if someone told me I'm transgender and what that means is that my soul is male or female. And this happened once. I don't know if you remember, there was some cult that was about like finding your like spirit fire or something like that. And they were like, I don't know if you, but anyway,
it doesn't sound familiar off the top of my head,
okay.
but I love a cult.
There's a Netflix documentary on it, and eventually they couldn't find enough people to join the cult to match people up to their sort of spiritual other half, so to speak. And so the leaders said, well, even though people are male and female, that you can spiritually be male in a female body and vice versa. So they started hooking up, people with other people of the same sex, and it confused the people who were in the cult. And so you can have that spiritualized approach to it. But I think the better approach, again, and maybe to go back to narrative or just, conscious experience, what it means to be a conscious entity, is that consciousness doesn't have to align perfectly with chromosomal structure, because sure. It's more, it's a brain aspect, if we're gonna be a physicalist anyway. And so I don't necessarily think that it's, if I say I identify as one gender, even though I am, embodied as quote unquote this by societal standards, I don't necessarily think it has to follow from that I'm somehow breaking with my body, so to speak. Because that expression, I think, comes from your body, the brain, so there's more going on there than just, I can reduce this to chromosomes or God help us, like genitalia.
Yeah.
There's a brain involved there, and it's a very complex thing. And as we just said, its primary goal is navigating reality through some experiential, program that it creates.
Spaceship so human,
it's very reasonable to me that a brain could do that, and that it's not necessarily like, I think it's still, I need to look this up again. I can't remember if because we're still on the diagnostic, that DS, what is it? DS.
I thought we were on 5.
Yeah, I think we're on 5, and I think 5 still refers to it as gender dysphoria. Is that it?
Gender dysphoria, gender dysmorphia, maybe. I haven't read a DSM in many years, but yeah.
So bad with names and remembering particular titles and things, but I don't think it has to be considered a psychological ailment unless we say, no, only this conscious state should pair with this chromosomal body.
Right.
But I'm not sure how we get there, right? Because I think that's something above and beyond what we can say from empirical data.
Thought crime is beyond my ability to muster to judge. No, I think it's interesting because I think well, first of all, I'll say like I guess I don't know that I ever struggled with. I guess I've been more confused than ever had a problem with transgender individuals. Like I really don't like gender, and have always just had a problem with it, and didn't like being told what I was supposed to do based on some idea of what part of the human spectrum I fell in. And so I wonder, like, I did not understand, well, probably into my early 20s, why anyone would then adhere to that voluntarily. Like, why would you sign up for gender? And that was, I see that as a shortcoming on my part, and I think I've grown, and, I hopefully didn't alienate any friends or anything. But my friends have told me I remember myself as worse than I actually was. So I feel like I was really harsh to people, and they're like, no. So I don't know. It's hard to say now. But anyways, the idea of dignity, though, of letting someone live in the body they choose, I think is an interesting question. Though I can't beat this club guy. It's an interesting question. I don't know is there any call for, where is there a call for limitations ever? on how the body could be altered to match the human, to respect their dignity.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not
yeah,
trying to like make a case for any extremes or anything. It's just interesting because we have people who want to control other people's, control of their body. And there might be there I do not completely dismiss the idea that there might be moral imperatives to stop somebody from doing something with their body that doesn't
yeah,
hurt anybody else.
yeah,
um, Suicide. Now we're gonna get demonetized, but self harm is one of those things where we have a moral imperative, I think, to prevent that. Um, but and that's where that kind of, oh no, there's a relative subjective idea of harm, and there's a lot of people out there who are. And again, we talked about at the beginning of this, like, I don't know the answer. I just find it really interesting that people have drawn certain lines about where they feel like other people are free to express
yeah,
their humanity and their dignity through their body, their dress, a
yes,
bathroom, etc. And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think I find it very confusing that they drew the line so early.
Yeah. Well, and I think I remember when I was teaching bioethics, there was a reading that I used to do in the class, and it was called Amputees by Choice.
Mm.
And it was people who believed, I've always identified, they would say something like this,
Mm-hmm.
as like a blind individual, or as someone
Mm-hmm.
who is a quadriplegic, or who doesn't have,
Mm-hmm.
like 4 limbs. And they would seek a surgery to get their bodies to match this identity
Mm-hmm.
that they have. Okay. And this was a sort of really interesting example, because it was like a lot of students would say at that moment, well, that seems, how could we do that? Right.
Yeah.
And so they accept a certain paternalism there, that
Mm-hmm.
a doctor should be able to say, no, you're not sort of thinking about this correctly. And it's okay for me or the state or someone to step in here and say, for your own protection, we're going to override this, this sort of desire that you're having. Which also led me, just as a side note, to create the only joke I've ever created on my own, or one of the only I've ever created on my own. And the joke was that a man goes into to visit a surgeon and says, "I would like to have my arms replaced with, ursine arms." And the doctor says, "We don't do that here." And he says, "Well, you'll be hearing from my lawyer, because I don't take kindly to people denying my right to bear arms." And that was
There's a good one.
was the only one I ever made, and every time I tell it, everyone's like, "You are just so dumb."
It's a dad joke. You're a dad. It's fine.
It's a dad joke. But the question then of, yeah, is there like a boundary, or a boundary? One that I often hear brought up by, let's say, some of my more conservative friends, because this does tend sometimes to fall along those political lines,
Yeah.
right? It's part of the culture war. Almost everything now is, but
Well, yeah.
like, what if someone who is white identifies as black, and then could they get a surgery to
Yeah.
to do that? And that's really difficult for everyone to kind of make sense of.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's where you start to get into, I mean, for very good reasons. I think people understand this implicitly. A personal choice that affects only you versus something that is affecting a whole culture of people because
Yes.
of again, and we're not far off from gender and sex here, but a culture of people where the color of their skin has become a part of an identity that doesn't arise biologically from the pigmentation, but rather
Yes.
arises entirely from cultural norms.
Social.
Yeah. And again, gender, we know that there's we don't know, but studies have shown that there's probably a component of certain behaviors that may be gendered, and they might be related to hormones in the womb, or who knows, but there's something there. But we don't know where that limit is scientifically for sure. And even if we did, like, how does this, where does the data impact what we let people do? I mean, you're talking about the self amputees, the voluntary amputees, and it reminds me of my own coursework in college and medical ethics of the right to refuse treatment.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know the Dax Shepard case, but he was burned very badly and wanted to go home,
Oh
even though
yeah.
that would
Yeah.
kill him. And, these kind of ethics questions in medicine. But I mean, it's more than that in some of these cases because, again, we have people who are trying to say no one should be allowed to do X, Y, Z. I mean, obviously, there's an issue with like minors, and that complicates it in a direction I don't really need to go into right now. But just talking about, let's say, fully adult people in sound mind, and where those limits are. Anyways, again, this is all for me about that dignity, and you're talking about how so many things are culture wars now, and I find again I have a 3.5 hour talk about identity, but I think that to kind of start to tie this up because I don't want to keep you up all night, but to kind of tie our thoughts together here. I think when I'm talking about that narrative spirit, that spirit's in the material world idea, to me, so, you talked about, okay, you're human. What does that mean? I think the same question of like, who are you is, so difficult for people to really answer. And they'll always answer it in those terms of identity. Well, I'm a man. I'm a father. I'm a Pittsburgher. I'm a Steelers fan, right? And I talk in the identity thing about how like sometimes being a Steelers fan makes you punch somebody, and that doesn't seem like
No, that's not. Yeah.
Your identity seems to have gone out of control. These are the elements that you need to think about before you act. Like, why am I doing this? Anyways, but I find that those two ideas are so tied together, because that narrative self is, you might remember better than me. There was a philosopher, and I thought it was Heidegger, but I tried to look it up and I couldn't find it. But that talked about the idea of like an eyeball floating in space with nothing else around it, and how since it could not see itself. What's that?
I think it may be an accent. Let me because I think it's is it an Anaximandrite? Because I know
that
I
old? I thought it was one of the Germans.
I was just well, this is back before this is back. I think this is before Aristotle for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
But regardless, it cannot know itself.
Empedocles. It was Empedocles. Empedocles.
Oh, I don't even know. I don't think I know that dude. But it can't know itself because it cannot see anything to distinguish itself from. And so identity and the narrative becomes a matter of what distinguishes us from everyone else. And that is why another reason that the narrative self is so unique, because it can only be ascribed to one collection of atoms, molecules over time, things said, thoughts thought. And I think that's what's very interesting about it is even in a multiverse, you might have something that matches it precisely, but there's no reason to believe that that would be quote unquote the same because they would be distinguished by space, or time. So that's one place where I also find that the space-time kind of idea of the narrative to be compelling because of the uniqueness of it. Anyways. And that ties back to, and identity doesn't have anything to do with that. I went on about it.
Well, I do think there's a connection, and to try to simplify some of that. Like I teach a course on basically philosophical anthropology or theological anthropology. You can look at it either way. And, it's basically just two questions. What are we and who are we? And sort of deciding the difference between those two questions, the what and the who, and how that sort of functions for us. But both of them, I think, I think the who is almost more difficult than the what for students, because when I ask who are you, it's like that scene from Alice in Wonderland, where it's like, you're giving an answer and you say, no, I'm not asking, what, or I'm asking who are you, such that if that changed, you would no longer be you. Or you would have a different identity or something of that nature. And it's a very difficult thing for students, I think, or anyone really to think through. I mean, that's why it's so interesting, because it's philosophically complex.
Yeah, it's very open ended too.
But the
When
narrative, narrative helps with this
yeah.
because if I start saying like, well, who else has had your story? I mean, like
Mm-hmm.
who fits that? What other, you know, continuity of molecule mass, has sort of produced, if you will, subjectivity that is the sort of subject of your own story. And well, really, at that point, you can't say anything else. I mean, no one else appears to fit that bill, just me. Even if you created a clone of me, or like I say, like even if your dog passed away, and I created an exact replica of your dog, there's a broken continuity there that you
Mm-hmm.
don't think of it as a dog anymore. And I think that's it's the continuity that's the problem there, you know.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
also
I mean,
think, no, go ahead.
no, I
Go
was
ahead.
gonna
Sorry.
say it's such an interesting question because it's just like obviously like a clone of your dog that starts from a puppy. No, not the same dog. Okay,
Yes.
well, what if 2 months later I come back to you with a dog that's 2 years old? What if I
Yeah.
3 months later come back with a dog that's the same age as when you saw your dog last, but it's
Yeah.
not that dog? And
Yes.
yeah, again, it becomes complex, and I think.
Well, and I think that's why I think the hard problem of consciousness is so important. And this is
Mm-hmm.
we didn't get into this a lot, but it's I think what would be unsettling or dissatisfying about the dog who was the same exact age, even if it happened at the moment that your
Yeah.
first dog died, is that you would suspect that whatever it is, I'm thinking here of Nagel, like we don't know what it's like to be a bat, we don't know what it's like to be a dog, but to the extent that there is a subject of a life there,
Mm-hmm.
to use Reagan's expression, we don't think it's the same subject of a life. Like we think that if both dogs were alive simultaneously, they would not share one conscious experience,
Right.
right?
It's
Experience, and so
very it's very doppelganger. It's very
yes, right.
uncanny valley.
Yes. Well, and actually, for Christians, this is a problem. A question I ask all the time. It's that, you know, if continuity is important, and they often think it is, like, what do you make of the fact that, like, let's say the resurrection of the dead, like, who is actually resurrected? Like, what
Yeah.
body is resurrected? Is it you? Because now you have this break in continuity, and the question is that me that has been resurrected, or like the classic Star Trek thing is like, once you get beamed somewhere, is it you anymore?
Yeah.
There are new you being created, and I think this is a difficult problem for Christians who really emphasize the resurrection of the body. It's a difficult question to answer, right? Like, how does that maintain? How is continuity maintained there? And does it matter that there's a discontinuity that appears to occur?
I mean, I think that. Oh man, we do another 2 hours on just the thought of Jesus as a human, and then the continuity that either resurrection or Trinitarianism or however you want to look at that, the divinity, um, creating such the same problem, in my mind, as
Yes.
the dog.
Yeah.
Like, all right,
Yeah.
well, when he was mortal, did he know what it was like to be divine? When he's
Yeah.
divine, we say he knows what it's like to be mortal. That's why he came to earth and was sacrificed, so that God could know what it was like to be mortal. Okay. But when now you have the dual experience, divinity and humanity, how does each one color the other, and how are you still like,
Yeah.
how does your relationship to humanity change, or how is it inherently different because you are also divine? Like, really,
Yeah.
can you understand?
And how does humanity get integrated into the continuity that was divinity before that?
Right. Yeah.
And
I mean, it's those
yeah.
moments of like, why hast thou forsaken me, and things like that, where Jesus as a mortal, it's those. I think that whether it's author's intent, but whether or not they intended, the authors of the Bible, to be so deeply interesting in those moments where
Yeah.
they say those things, I don't know if that was their intent, but oh my, and I mean, I don't even know what was the original translation. I'm not an expert on all that stuff. So, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
just,
yeah.
it is, I mean, there are some very interesting thoughts contained in there that I don't know if they were on purpose or not. But anyways, that's a different topic.
No,
So
very much.
we got we've been almost 2 hours. This has been amazing. I mean,
Yeah,
you're, we have known each other for a very long time now, and I
very
was
much.
telling I don't know if my wife or my friends or something, like, that you were like a little brother to me for when we were younger, and I was like, I hope I
Yeah.
didn't bully him too much.
No,
Your
I have,
brother
I
was
have.
probably more responsible for that than me. And talking about narrative and how people, um, in their lives, their lines of fate, their path through space time separates and comes back together, and um, re-meet people that you've always known. It's so amazing every time I get to talk to someone. I mean, and in this case, you, who I I've picked up a different conversation than the last time we left, but it is still as amazing as the conversations we had when we were teenagers. So thank you so
Yeah,
much for your
yeah.
time.
No,
I'm
I
I'm not
appreciate
trying to
you.
kick you off,
Any other
but
time? No, no, it's all good. I mean, I have things I want to do. I
yeah,
need
you have a
to.
family and stuff. I don't want to keep you here forever. We
No,
can
but
do this again.
this has been amazing for me. I mean,
There
I
are
like having these conversations,
there are 18 people
and talking with
watching.
you is always a pleasure.
There are 18 people watching, which
18
is
now.
the most I've ever had. So I have to get you back. So we will figure it out. But yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, this is unfortunately not the end of the conversation because we didn't really resolve anything. But do you have anything you want to plug? You have a book, right? At least one.
I have a couple books, and a couple articles that and I'm working through a lot of stuff. A lot of the stuff I've written before is about environmental ethics, and a lot of stuff I don't agree with the stuff that I've said before. Like I've
Yeah,
grown and developed a lot since then.
that's fun.
But I actually think the thing I'd like to plug most is
Yeah.
actually if you do, this is going to sound completely ridiculous. If
No.
you do enjoy Hollow Knight, I there on if you Google or if you do a search for the Void and Ode to Hollow Knight, you can find a song that I wrote about Hollow Knight that
Oh
is
my.
philosophic, that represents sort of some philosophical depths that I have in my own sort of personal faith journey, and I think that resonates in Hollow Knight. So, and actually, I
Oh,
think it's one of the
cool.
best songs I've ever read. So, you should check that out if you're interested in this kind of stuff. It's called The Void and Ode to Hollow Knight, and you can let me know if you like it or not.
Yeah. If as if
And
it
all the
wasn't,
footage.
I was gonna say, as if it wasn't enough that you have a PhD, that you've written books, that you've beaten Hollow Knight. Also, to just show how much more accomplished Ryan is than me, he writes music and sings and is a proficient musician. So that's great. Wow, I feel great. Your brother, when we were in high
Oh,
school, your
thanks.
brother wrote a musical just to show me
Yeah.
how just small I was.
Yeah, well, just imagine living in that shadow your whole life. That's
I don't know. I mean, I know he's a big shot lawyer, but you've got a lot under your wings. I can't. I'm glad that I don't think my parents know how successful the both of you are. I think they have an inkling, but I'm glad because they would be like, then they would be like, oh well, now the McLaughlin parents are so much prouder of their kids than us because
yeah,
their kids have accomplished so much more. No, it's great. I
yeah.
love you, not just like a brother. I love you as a brother. Thank you so much for your time. I can't wait to do it
Likewise,
again. Have a
likewise, my
great
friend.
night. Say hi to your family for me.
Absolutely,
Also, a lovely wife and
you too.
child. I mean, I also have a lovely wife and child, so we're even there. But
Yeah, yeah, we're square on that one.
at least you could have taken a -1 on that for me, but not even. All right. Thanks so much, Ryan. Have a great night.
All right, thank you, good sir.
And thanks to all of you. I'm going to close. Not going to close all of it. I'm just going to put it off the window so we don't have to see it anymore. No, I have 20 watching now. So my goodness, I hope that you all enjoyed it. I really had a great time. Again, Ryan obviously is a accomplished, educated, and fruitful mind with a wonderful pile of thoughts that I just love to bounce ideas off with him. We obviously have different. Well, we started off probably on different religious paths, as it were, or he kind of went down a path and I went down a path at a certain point. But it's so interesting on how much we still come together and see things in the same way, and a lot of that I think comes from a place of a shared moral view, a shared again, we talked about gratitude. I think it's a shared gratitude for what we have lucked out in, and how fortunate we've been, and the love that we have gotten to experience with our families and friends. And it's easy to be grateful. And if you've had a harder time, I know that it's hard to be gracious, and it can be very hard. It can be easy to feel spiteful. And I don't have an easy solution to that, but I could tell you that, again, I've said this on the stream a lot, and it's cheesy, but everyone deserves love. Everyone deserves respect. Everyone deserves human dignity. I hope that you give yourself that. I hope that you give the people around you that. And I'll give, the last plug for 5calls.org. Please do call your senators and your representative and tell them to restore the CFPB's funding. This is part of my journey of love and altruism. I'm not saying that I could get some job at some software company and make $1 billion. Like that's not me, So I'm not saying I gave up a bunch to do government work instead. I'm very happy with my job, and I don't think I could have ever really done. I don't think I would. I don't think I would do as well in other environments. I'm very very happy in the public service space. That said, it is fulfilling to work public service. It feels really good, and I hope that this little act of democracy on your part, calling, expressing your First Amendment rights, and supporting protection of people's finances, which can help them. It helps them, unfortunately, express themselves. It is, I think, unfortunate that money has become speech in our culture, but I'm not saying I have a great alternative plan for that. So, it is what it is. So thank you. Thank you for making calls. Thank you for sending postcards. Thank you for going to rallies. Thank you for protests. Thank you for anything you do to make this world better. That's again, that's what the stream's all about. Save the CFPB. Make the world a better place. Everyone is deserving of love. Sometime maybe I'll do a 3.5-hour talk about how a proof of how everybody is deserving of love. I might need Ryan's help with that. That's it for today. Stay tuned for more streams this week. We don't have the days nailed down yet. I usually can't really figure them out until the weekend before, so hopefully by Sunday you'll see something out on the social medias or a post in YouTube's. And I'm on Instagram at Mr. Gone is my name there, and I've been posting about Save the CFPB there. And you can always, subscribe to the YouTube and get notified about stuff that's happening here. And please like and comment. That helps too. Send this to your friends. If you get 5 subscribers, you become a member of the fan club. If you get 10 subscribers to join, you become a fan of the fan club. And that's all honor system. Mike, don't try and tell me who you got to subscribe. I don't want to know. It's honor system. Anyways, thanks again. I hope you enjoyed me failing. I did not even get past the first boss of Hollow Knight. I just danced around and ran back and forth. I got lost 30 times. It was terrible. It's over now. Good night, everybody. Oh, and I need to hold on. We got to get the song ready to go out on. And here's the song. Thank you all so much. Is the song playing? No, it's not playing. Thank you. There's the song. Oh, and the song means goodbye. Bye, everybody.